handout. If you don't, they're right up here. There's also lesson 5 for next week if you want to pick one up early. I've got lots of slides, and I probably just included too many of the Sea of Galilee, but I just liked them. So we'll move pretty quickly through a lot of those. But that was our first view of the Sea of Galilee as we came in from the south. There is a satellite picture. I didn't take that. I got that off the internet of the Sea of Galilee, but you can see it's really a lake. It's not a sea. And it's not really all that large. As we say on the outline, it's about 8 miles wide and about 13 miles long. It has a little bulge up on the left side. And we're going to see lots of places that Jesus did things along the Sea of Galilee. And there were many more that we're not going to cover tonight. Primarily, we went along the left side and up over the top and then up further to some other places north of the Sea of Galilee while we made our visit. I've told you before that the Dead Sea is well below sea level, but what some of you may not realize is the Sea of Galilee is also below sea level. And so you see that the Lake of Galilee, as it's called there, is 200 meters or 600 feet below sea level. You see sea level running across there. And the Jordan actually starts at Mount Hermon, partway down. It says it starts at 520 meters, and then it goes down to the Lake of Galilee, and then further down to Jericho and the Dead Sea. Sea of Galilee has been called lots of things, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time about this, but it's been called the Sea of Chinnereth because there was a town named Chinnereth. And so in Joshua, it was called the Sea of Chinnereth. In Luke, it was called the Lake of Gennesaret. That's another city that was along there. And then in Matthew, at one place, well, it's called the Sea of Galilee. John, however, in the Gospels, it's called, I guess that's blocked out, but it says Tiberias down there. And Tiberias is the large city that we're going to go to in just a minute. Okay, so again, I told you I took lots of pictures. I don't know that it's all that different. If you've been to lakes that you think are beautiful with the mountains and the green and the blue, but there's just something special about the Sea of Galilee and knowing that Jesus was on the Sea of Galilee as well as all the way around it. Now, that's not quite as green as some of the other places, but one of the things you notice is you can see across the sea. If you're on one side, you can see the other side. You can't necessarily see people over there, but you can see the mountains and the landscape. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. So here we are at our hotel in Tiberias, and it just happened to be, I think it was the 7th floor. And we were facing the Sea of Galilee, at least off to the side. So that was a view out our window. And you can see the balcony railing there. It was just pretty amazing for us to get to stand in our hotel room and look across. So I don't know why I took the picture and put that in of our bedroom, but it was nice. But there's the Sea of Galilee again. And it was starting to get dark, and so we were able to see things there. Now, we're going to talk more about this in a minute when we get down to about the 4th or 5th point, which it says Arbel. You don't read about this in the Bible, and yet this is probably the prominent landscape thing to see from the Sea of Galilee. Anywhere in the Sea of Galilee, if you're on the sea, you can see Mount Arbel here. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But the first day after we left our hotel, we went to a place and got on a boat. Let's see if I've missed anything real quick that I wanted to say. Well, from Tiberias. Tiberias was the capital of Galilee, by the way, during Jesus' time. And the Sanhedrin, after Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, they moved to Tiberias, away from Jerusalem and the persecution. So we're at Magdala. Does that sound like any name you've ever heard before? Let me say Mary Magdalene. Well, her name was Magdalene because she was from Magdala. that probably wasn't her last name. Like my last name's Tabor. She was Mary of Magdalene or Magdala. Okay, so in any event, that's where we went sailing on a ship, which was probably a little bigger than the ships that Jesus sailed on, and we'll see that in a minute. Yes, ma'am.
It looks like, you know, you can see it doesn't look like there's any mountains over there on that one far left.
Well, you'll see that there are. I'm not sure why it seems that way. I have a bunch of those pictures. It was probably just a little bit foggy there, but you can see the mountains are there. They're all the way around, basically. So there we are in the ship. There were 52 of us here. And as I said, you can see the shore from any point. Well, we had an unusual request of the boat captain. He said nobody had ever made it before but Everett. And Everett said, I want you to take us to the deepest part of the Sea of Galilee. And so it ended up being almost exactly in the middle, north and south and east and west. And we went to the deepest part. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. It's from this passage, and we're not going to read it all, but you remember the story of Peter fishing, and he wasn't catching anything, and he fished all night. And Jesus said, I want you to put out to the deep. And Peter said, okay, I'll do that, although you could tell he was pretty reluctant. And so they went to the deep. He says, I'll do as you say, and let down the nets. And what happened? They caught a great quantity of fish, says in verse 6, so much that their nets began to tear, and they signaled partners in another boat to come and help them. And they filled both of the boats to the point that the boats were actually sinking. That's how many fish there were. And so when Simon Peter saw this, he said, go away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. And the King James, I really like. This is the New American Standard. But Jesus, down in the last verse, said, do not fear. From now on, you will be. The King James says, I will make you fishers of men. But it says, I'm not remembering what that says now, and I can't say it, but I will make you fishers of men in any event, something to that extent. Okay, so that's why we went to the deep. And we were at a place that they had a detector to tell them the depth, and they knew that was the deepest place. Whether or not that was exactly where Jesus went to have them fish or not, we don't know, but it was pretty close to it. And that was pretty amazing to me. Okay, so there we are in the deep. There are some cities, but primarily they're not allowing growth around the shores of the Sea of Galilee because it's such a tourist attraction. They want people to build if they're going to build over the side of the hill. But there are some towns who are already there. And you can see that mountain that I told you about, Arbel, which is right there. Okay, we'll see that more later. So there they're showing us how the men fish. They didn't have huge nets. They had individual nets, and they had to pull in the nets and dump them and then throw them out again. But this is probably about the size of the net that Peter and the other fishermen would have used. And that's showing how he dips it in, and then he lets it float out, and then he gathers it up. He didn't catch any fish. We were in the deep, and I'm told you wouldn't normally during the day catch fish in the deep. That's why Peter didn't really want to do that, but Jesus knew, didn't he? Okay, there's a map that we actually bought. They had it on the boat. They spelled Galilee with 2 L's on the end there, which is different. I have a copy of that here if you want to look at it later. But it talks about lots of the things that Jesus did around the Sea of Galilee. We're going to talk about most of those as we move on. Okay, again, sorry if I take too many pictures, but I hope you just get the idea. There's Mount Arbel again in the background. You see how prominent it is?
Gary?
Yes, ma'am.
I can't, well, I was thinking, I've heard that, you know, on the Sea of Galilee, it gets windy and stormy. And
I'll show you some pictures of that.
okay, because so there's like, because of the formation of the mountains and stuff, isn't there an area where the wind comes through more?
Yes, from the north.
That's what I thought.
And you're going to see, I didn't actually see this, but I went on the internet and I got some pictures of stormy seas. Like, so you're going to see that near the end tonight. All right, so we're on the boat, and there we are. Finally, we're coming back to shore. I could have shown you double that number of pictures. There were at least that many, but anyway, I hope you're getting a feel. There we are at Magdala, and there's another interesting thing. At Magdala, there's a synagogue there that dates back to the 1st century. And so this was one of a few synagogues away from Jerusalem at the time of Christ. And Mary Magdalene probably went to that synagogue. And it says the home of Mary Magdalene. And we're going to see there's the Migdal Synagogue, and I don't expect you to read all that. They have the ruins, and we're going to see the ruins. There they are. And it was divided into different rooms, and they had kind of a study hall in the opening room, and then they had the regular sanctuary. I couldn't tell that by looking at all this, but I did see that they had wonderful mosaics on the floors, but they weren't astrology like we saw last week. These were more decorative flooring that they would have had in the sanctuary. Okay, we're moving away from Magdala now, and we're headed toward Arbel, and you have to go up to get to Arbel. And so there's a picture of Arbel. It's kind of hard to see, but right here is a canyon, if I can find the right thing. This is a canyon here. And so it's high over here, and there's the canyon and deep, and then there's more here. We had to go around this way because we had to come in up here to see Arbel.
Where's the sea?
Where is the sea? The sea is behind us from where this is taken, but you're going to see that you can see almost everywhere on the Sea of Galilee from Arbel, just like people can see you. Okay, so there we are at the edge looking down, and it's quite a drop there. That's the city. That's actually the city's real close to the Sea of Galilee, but you can see what an impressive place that is. See how straight up and down those walls are? There's a picture looking back the other way, and the walls are still straight up and down. Well, in a minute, you're going to see that they had fortifications partway up the wall that you got there from the bottom. And those were hard to conquer. And yet, when the Assyrians came in and they conquered this place, they let men down on ropes from the top down to all of these places to root the people out. In any event, I have several pictures of just showing the area. Looking down, you can just see everywhere. That's looking straight across, basically, at the other side of that ravine or valley. Okay, now we're looking at the Sea of Galilee, which is to the right of where we looked originally. That town is over on the left, and there's the Sea of Galilee, and that's that curve at the upper part that we saw before. That's Mount Tabor, by the way, if you look back the other way. And now we're looking toward the middle of the Sea of Galilee. We've walked over toward another edge, and there you can see almost down to the south end of the Sea of Galilee. So there's Donna, and you can see across the lake. You can see buildings and things, but probably not people without binoculars. Did Jesus go to Mount Arbel? Well, the scriptures don't tell us, but more than likely it did. He did. We're told that sometimes when he was coming off the Sea of Galilee off a boat, he went up to a mountain. Well, it may have been this mountain that he went up to because of the view. His apostles went with him. Okay, I'm sorry I skipped one, but we're just looking back to the north there at some more mountains that are higher, but those are some of the fortifications I told you about, and I didn't go down to take these pictures. I took pictures that were posted on the wall. but you can see that they had stairways and caves, and this is about 3/4 of the way down that canyon wall. And there's another picture looking up to show that it was a long way down, but Arbel was a stronghold because it was hard to invade. It had an upper level, which is where we were, and there was also a lower level, a city down below. It's really not there anymore. Okay, so just to kind of set the stage for where we are, we've talked about Nazareth before, and Jesus, of course, was from Nazareth. Cana was where he did his first miracle. We stayed in Tiberias. We showed you the hotel room there. We're at Arbel now, but there's also Magdala, which was just north of that. And we came back to Arbel. And we're also going to see this place right here, which it's Gennesaar. And then we're going to see the Mount of Beatitudes. And there's Capernaum. We're going to be looking at that too. But those are all along the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, I told you we were going to go to Gennesaar, and there was an ancient Galilee boat that was discovered in 1986 when somebody was doing something and they found it. It was all covered with mud, and they had to go in and start clearing it. That's what it probably looked like. And that's probably like the boats that Peter, Andrew, John would have had. That's about the size that they were, the fishing boats. And that tells you a little bit about how they dated it. Carbon-14 testing said it probably came from the time when the Second Temple still existed. So that's before AD 70, but it's probably about the same time that Jesus was around, AD 30 or so. And so it says Jewish fishermen lived along the shores. We knew that, didn't we? From Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And so that's just kind of showing you people out fishing still. And there is the boat that they found, and they've covered it with some protective foam, and they're going to try to pick it up and get it where they want it. I guess that's all the pictures I had. There's a mock-up of the way this boat looked when it was covered with all of that protective stuff. That's right here on the right-hand side of the picture. Okay, we're moving now to Peter's primacy. That's not really a city, but it's a church now, and they built it because they wanted to celebrate Peter being asked 3 times, "Do you love me?" And if you'll remember when that happened, it actually happened after Jesus was resurrected and back up in Galilee. But anyway, they make a pretty big deal out of the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, and we stopped there. And so there's the passage in John 21, and he asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And of course, Peter was maybe disappointed that Jesus would ask him the same question 3 times, but Jesus was making a point with him. How many times did Peter deny Jesus? 3 times. I think that had something to do with it. Yes, ma'am.
How is it that the Jewish people today, how is it that they allow the naming of this city? And so, I mean, they don't believe in the New Testament. I mean, they don't believe Jesus was the Messiah.
They believe in tourism. And Israel really wants to promote tourism, and that's the reason that they are supporting all these churches. Most of the churches are Roman Catholic anyway, but they just support churches because that's tourism. The Sea of Galilee gets a huge number of visitors every year. Millions of people come to the Sea of Galilee. So they want to have things for you to see, so you'll spend your money in the area.
And I know in recent years that they have become more united with Christians. There are a number of
Jews and Christians can get along, and we're going to see that in the future when we go to the 7 churches of Asia. You'll see where Christians and Jews had businesses side by side with one another and got along, and they actually let Christians come into their synagogue and put some of the Christian symbols in their synagogue, which is pretty amazing to me.
Yeah.
But without people stirring them up, just common people can get along a lot better when they don't have leaders that are trying to make everybody your enemy. Okay, so that's just inside the church. You can see the Jerusalem cross that we've talked about before. And there it is also. I saw that a lot. So there we are on the Sea of Galilee again. Too many pictures, I suppose, but see the fishing boats and the tourist boats and the tourists, by the way. And we were on an international tour. That was our bus there. And so we're going to drive around and we're going to come to another place, the Mount of Beatitudes. And of course, if you go to Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus gave his Sermon on the Mount, he starts off with the Beatitudes. And there's a beautiful chapel. It's so quiet and it's just a mood there. And Everett says that was one of his favorite places along the Sea of Galilee, was to quietly sit there on the Mount of the Beatitudes and look down at the sea. There are the Beatitudes. There are 8 of them. We don't have time to go over all of them, although I did set them forth. They're the Beatitudes about who's blessed. And Jesus said all that for a reason, and there are many sermons there, of course. But the Beatitudes were wonderful sayings that hopefully made a difference in lots of lives. So there's the church. It has 8 sides to it. You can't really see that there, but you can see it more when you get inside. There are 8 different areas there, one for each beatitude. We got to sing inside, but the only way you get to do that is if you ask. And they allowed us to sing one hymn, and we sang a hymn, and when we finished, people that are around us that weren't singing, they clapped for us. We got to sing some other places too, but this was one of them. So that's just looking out. It's beautifully landscaped. You're looking down at the sea from this hill, and the people would have been down the hill toward the lake, and Jesus would have been up above them, speaking down toward them as he gave the Sermon on the Mount. Just other pictures of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, there's Peter's fish. That's actually the dish that was called at the restaurant. Donna later ordered that at another restaurant. I don't think I got a picture of that, but this man ordered Peter's fish there. He said it was good. In any event, that was caught just a few feet away, probably, from where we're eating. Now we're going to Capernaum. I have read the Bible my whole life, and I know I miss things. Every time you read it, you see something new, but I don't think I ever realized how significant Capernaum was to Jesus. So we're going to mention just a few of those. It says Capernaum is the town of Jesus. Of course, they're saying that's for tourists, and they want tourists to come see it. But you know who else was from there? Peter. At least his mother lived there, and he probably did too. But you see in Matthew 4, verse 13, it says he came, and it's talking to Jesus here. He came and settled in Capernaum. And so he actually made Capernaum his headquarters, if you will, for his ministry in Galilee. There at Capernaum. And I don't expect you to try to read that at all. I took 2 pictures of this for some reason. I'm trying to remember. It says there, Matthew 9:1, Jesus stepped into the boat, crossed over, and came to Capernaum, his own town. That's what Matthew calls it. It's his own town. And that tells you a little bit more about, he chose 5 apostles from Capernaum. It says Peter or Simon, Andrew, James, and John, and the tax collector Matthew were all from Capernaum. So when he called Matthew as a tax collector to follow him, that's where he was in Capernaum.
It said that I just read a little part, that he performed a lot of miracles there.
He did.
And so he had made a comment in the New Testament that
he mentioned
his hometown,
yes,
he couldn't perform the miracles.
Last week, we saw that when he was appearing in Nazareth there in the synagogue, he said something about, you may be listening to me because of the things that I've done in Capernaum. And he was talking about the miracles.
Right.
But then he went on to say, the gospel is going to come to people other than the Jews. And that's when they got so mad that they tried to throw him off that mountain. Okay, so he came to Peter's home in Matthew the 8th and saw the mother-in-law, Peter's mother-in-law. I said his mother is his mother-in-law. Peter was married, lying sick in bed with a fever, and he touched her hand and the fever left her. Well, they say this was the house of Peter. It may have been the house of his mother-in-law, but guess what? There's a church built over the top of it. Surprising, huh? Except it's not completely built over it. So I'll show you. This is actually the flooring for the church above. But you see right here, there's an area that was the house that they believe was Peter's house. That was designated as his house in the 3rd century in any event. So it may very well have been. And Peter's room is actually in the very center of there.
Very uncomfortable. I mean, if you were to sleep on that.
So I went 2 slides. Let's see. Okay, we're moving on. That was Capernaum. Quickly, I understand, but we're moving now to Tel Dan. And I have some brochures here that you may want to look at after. I have one on Tel Dan. Well, I've never really heard of Tel Dan. I've heard of the tribe Dan, but the city existed for a long period of time. And so there's some interesting things about that. In Genesis 14, when Lot got carried away by these armies and Abraham went after the armies and conquered them, he went as far as Dan, and Dan is as far north as you can go and still be in Galilee or Israel. And then in Judges 18:29, it says they named the city Dan, so maybe it wasn't called Dan when Abraham was there, but it's the same place. And then it says the name was previously Lashes. In any event, there was a palace of Agrippa because he wanted some control, and so he had this palace as far north as you could go in Israel, and it was pretty elaborate. That's not really the important thing, although there's some of the ruins of that palace. They asked me to sit there. That's the gate. And I just saw something the other day on the internet about the importance of gates in Israel. A gate was not just a place to go through the wall. A gate was a place where people sat. The elders sat at the gate and basically held discussions with people. So it was an assembly place. And there were also lots of other people that commingled there. Well, somebody asked me to sit there. I didn't know why until they said, we wanted you to be sitting at the gate. So there I am. That was a pretty big place, and there were walks that you could take. But in any event, rushing water, beautiful along the walks. But we walked to a wall opening, which is a gate, but it's closed off. And they call this Abraham's gate. And they believe that Abraham went here when he went to Dan. And so they covered it over because it's only being excavated now. The whole city of Dan was covered over with about 10 feet of dirt. And they've been digging it all up now for years and years. But they're just now processing this gate. And so you can see the walls and the gate. So that was Dan. All right, now we're going to, it says the Herman Stream. It's so confusing because sometimes they just call things different. So one of the brochures talks about the Herman Stream National Park, but there's something else there. I gave you a little encouragement last week about something that was so amazing to me. We're going to get to that now. If I can present it in the right way. Let me show you where we are, just to be sure. We've already looked at other maps, but we're clear up here. We were at Dan. See how far up that is? There's Mount Herman. and that's really the end of Israel. But here's Caesarea Philippi. If you've ever heard of it, it's mentioned in the Bible. And you see that it's quite a ways past the Sea of Galilee. There's actually another lake there, if you will, and I don't even remember the name of that lake. But we went from Capernaum up to Dan and Caesarea Philippi. I didn't know what I was going to see there, but what I saw amazed me. There's our guide, and he's pointing to the sanctuary of Pan, P-A-N. And Pan was a god that was worshipped. And there was a large facility there that was part of the temple of Pan. But what is left there now is this cave. And that cave is pretty significant. And we got to walk up and look at the cave. And let me tell you a little bit more about it in a minute. There's no water in there now, but there used to be. The water from that mountain was down in the bottom of this cave. And they said that if they threw a goat after a sacrifice into this water, you never saw it again. You don't know where it went. And they put lines down to try to find out how far down this water went. And they never got a line to go all the way to the bottom. Now, I think perhaps that the water was so strong that it was washing the line that they were putting down and under where they were standing. And there's lots of water out to the front of this. But in any event, that was the temple of Pan, if you will. But it's called something else. Anybody want to guess what it's called? The gates of hell, or the gates of Hades. That's what it was called at Jesus' time. And this is what was amazing to me. After having read the Bible and looked at this passage before, do you remember when he asked the apostles, who do you say that I am? Well, they said, some say you're this person or that person, but who do you say that I am? And Peter said, you're the Christ, the Son of the God. And he said, blessed are you, Peter. Or he said, your name will now be Peter, which means the rock. And he says, upon this rock, I will build my church. I'm getting ahead of myself because I have the scripture up there. And what does he say then? And the gates of Hades, depending on the translation, the gates of hell shall not overpower it. Well, I've heard many sermons that say, when you read that the gates of hell will not overpower it, it's not talking about the gates of hell from them being the aggressor. It's talking about the gates of hell withstanding Christians attacking the gates of hell. And the gates of hell will not prevail. Christians will overcome the gates of hell. But if you look, Peter started following Jesus with other apostles back in Matthew, the 4th chapter. And we have all kinds of examples of the 4 Gospels talking about Peter and his interactions with Jesus. Jesus waited until they were clear up north in Galilee at this place, Caesarea Philippi, to ask him the question about who do you say that I am, and then to give this passage, upon this rock I will build my church. This mountain is a big rock. It looks like one big rock, if you will. Upon this rock I will build my church, but the rock's really Peter's statement, isn't it? And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. What's there now? Just a hole in the wall, just a cave that doesn't even have water in it anymore. They don't worship Pan anymore. Yes, ma'am.
Is Pandora's box? Does that come from the word?
I don't think so, but I will stand corrected if it does. I hadn't thought of that. As far as I know, Pan was a male god that was worshipped by many. I don't know that Pandora is any kin, but I may be mistaken. In any event, do you see what I was so impressed with? The statement that Jesus made. Jesus often spoke in parables, didn't he? But he also used illustrations, and he's using an illustration here that just blows me over. He says, Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell, he may be even pointing, will not prevail against you and your fellow followers. Amazing.
So that's how Pan translated out was gates of.
They called it the gates of hell because it was so deep they couldn't find the bottom, and also because Pan sacrificed animals and threw them in the water, and they never found them. I guess I need to show you the water that was out front of there. I probably did when we started, and I'm sorry if I missed it. Let's see if we're going to get there, I think. There's some water, but it's not rushing like it was now. But you remember that water that was rushing around at Dan? Well, there's water here too. And the Jordan River actually runs right by here, but this isn't the Jordan. This flows into the Jordan. Okay, we're now going to Hazar, which is not nearly as interesting, but if you want to look down below Caesarea Philippi, we're about 3 from the bottom. Tel Hazar had 21 levels of occupation. Remember, I've talked about that before. A level of occupation is where people live, and then somebody came along after them and built over the top of them. 21 layers. And we can see a couple of things about Hazar in the scriptures. So I just thought I'd include a couple of those. Joshua, when he was conquering, fought against the king of Hazar and other kings. And he defeated all of these kings and he destroyed their cities. But Hazar, he did more than just destroy the city. Notice what it said. He burned Hazar with fire. I'm not sure why. I haven't gone back to study that. I think he burned it with fire because Hazar was kind of an example of all of these places, but it was probably the worst in many ways. And so he not only destroyed it and killed every person with the edge of the sword, but he burned the city as well. And so we do see a couple of ruins at Hazar. There was a Canaanite palace there that no longer exists, of course. That's what it looked like. Those walls didn't burn, even though Joshua burned the place down. But they were torn down. I don't remember what the sign says now. I thought it was significant. But they had a water system that was unbelievable. Kind of amazing that they burned the city down. I guess their water system didn't save them. But I've shown you before down at Beersheba, down in the south, that they had an extensive water system. And we looked at one in Megiddo also. But here's a water system that you can see over the side, a big pit, and there's a cave that you walk through. And down here, there's a pit as well. So there's one of the pits that go down into the water system. And there's part of the cave that you can walk through where they had water that circulated all the way around. But they also had this, which is an olive press. And so it's hard for me to picture exactly how that worked. But they mashed the olives in that press. And you see those other places too. The fact that it's still there is pretty amazing. It's been there hundreds of years. That may not be from the 1st century, but it's several hundred years old in any event at this place. The olive oil press. So they press the olives and the water, or I should say the liquid from the olives runs down around the edges, and then they pick it up, I guess, with utensils or pictures. Okay, we're going to head away from the north part of Galilee. And I told you we had lots to see. We were trying to wrap up Israel's tour, and we had 2 more days. And so the second day we were supposed to go to the, just forgot the name. I've showed the picture of that before, to the museum in Jerusalem, and we did. But on the way from Galilee, we had come up, if you will remember, over on the the west side of the mountains. We came up a highway there. We're going to go back on the west side, and we're going to go. Well, there's a couple of last views. And so some of the people said, you know, we'd like a little more time with the Sea of Galilee. We haven't had enough. Just 3 days is not enough. And so there's the northern part. There's Arbel again, how prominent that is. There are many of the olive orchards and so forth. There are other plants growing there too. But we went to the edge, I think. And Donna got to get her feet wet in the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so we're looking back now to the east, and the mountains are pretty barren over there. That's actually Syria over there. Okay, I got these pictures off the internet. That picture is just going to set up the next picture, but do you see the storm clouds back there? They're coming from the north. Okay, now look at the waves. Look at the waves there. You can see the swells and the waves. I didn't think that was good enough, though. I wanted to see if I could find some more. So there's another picture of waves. And so you can picture them saying as Jesus was sleeping, you know, aren't you afraid that we're going to get drowned here in this storm? And Jesus, of course, said, peace be still, like the song that we sing. The waves may have been even taller than that. There's some waves, too, on the Sea of Galilee. Hard to believe, isn't it? Look how tall those are. Would you want to be in a boat out in the middle with a wave like that coming at you?
Yeah.
I wouldn't. Did you say yeah? I wouldn't want to be unless I was close to shore, believe me. All right. Now, this is not the Sea of Galilee anymore. This is the Mediterranean. And we've moved over to the Mediterranean. And this is an aqueduct. There's actually 2 aqueducts here. And you're seeing the Mediterranean Sea, which is beautiful and blue as well. But there were people out enjoying the beach. And there we are. We enjoyed it. Looking back. And I think I took a picture or two of the aqueduct that kind of ends right there. It's right on the edge of the old city of Caesarea, and that's Caesarea Maritima, not Caesarea Philippi. But again, Caesarea, both of them were named for Caesar. That's what Caesarea means. Okay, you can kind of see that that's pretty much filled in. There was another one that was more open. The water came from about 15 miles, I'm told. And Caesarea was really a large city. And it was one that was built by Herod the Great. You remember he died about 4 BC or 1 BC after he ordered male babies to be killed, trying to kill Jesus. But I told you he was a phenomenal builder. And some of the projects that he had, we saw Herodium, where he's buried. And we've seen other examples, Masada, that he built his palace on top of Masada. Well, he built this area. And there was not a deep water port in Israel. And he made it a deep water port. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But he came in. That's the hippodrome right there. A hippodrome is where they have races going around like Ben-Hur, where they race their chariots. This is a theater, and we're going to look at that. That's still standing, or at least parts of it. And then you're going to see the Deepwater Harbor that he made right here. And I have a better map of that in a minute. But we're walking in now to this amphitheater. And it's been reconstructed some, but a lot of the stuff is still there. They've reinforced it with concrete down here, but some of these walls up at the top are the original walls. And you see that they have chairs set up down at the bottom. They have a stage. They have sound equipment. They do programs there and everything. So it still exists. And you're looking out at the Mediterranean Sea. And there was what it probably looked like the stage would have been at least 3 stories tall, and they could have done all kinds of things with the stage. They could have had people on ropes like they were flying, like you've seen in some productions maybe or heard about. And so it was a theater more than anything else. They didn't have gladiators fighting at the bottom of this one, as I understand it. They did that another place here, the same city. Okay, and so just recently, they're still excavating this. They've been excavating it since the late 1900s, which 19th century, I should say, which was the 1800s. And so it's been 150 years now, and they're still excavating more. But they just found what they believe was the prison. You remember the Apostle Paul? He appealed to Caesar. Where was he when he did that? He was here at Caesarea. And this is where he saw Festus and was actually tried. And they said, we don't really have any reason to hold him, but he's appealed to Caesar. And so we're going to hold him here till we get a ship to take him. Paul ended up in Caesarea because they were trying to kill him in Jerusalem, and they were laying in wait for him. And he was let down from the walls of Jerusalem in a basket, and he was transported to Caesarea secretly. But that's how he got to Caesarea. And so they think that this was the entrance to the prison that he would have been in. So it wasn't exactly a hotel room, the Ritz. It was a dungeon, if you will. Now there's part of the walls of the hippodrome and the open area there. That's looking toward the harbor. Harbor's actually on the other side of that building where the flag is flying. But I found out that isn't it terrible when you lose people's names? Our tour people. Everett loves archaeology. And Everett has been a lot of places in Jerusalem and in Israel and done work. And he actually did some work here, and he was responsible for uncovering a picture of spring, which has a lady's face. And he showed us a picture of that, but I can't find it on the internet. I think they must have picked it up and moved it somewhere else. But we see these mosaic floors, and he took the time to tell us that this was significant. Do you know what that is? Well, that's a quote from the Bible. Now, this wasn't in the 1st century. This was probably in the 5th century, about 500 years later. You remember that Constantine changed the Roman feeling about Christians in the 3rd century and said, we're going to be Christian. So it's not unbelievable that there would be a scripture. Well, what does the scripture say? This was a building where probably people were to pay their taxes. So it is a quote from Romans 13, verse 3. Rulers are not a cause for fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear and authority? Do what is good and you'll have praise from the same. Pay your taxes, in other words. But it's pretty amazing. Everett pointed out, if the people that had tried Paul there could have only known. You remember at one point they said, almost thou persuadest me, or another translation is, you think you're going to persuade me to become a Christian? Well, if he'd have lived a little longer, he might have changed his mind. In any event, Caesarea is a great place. I got this off the internet just to show you. And it's unbelievable. He took some stones that weighed up to 100 tons and had them moved and put it all the way around here and then dug out so that ships could come into this deep water port. So it's the first deep water port in Israel. It existed for several hundred years, but this was a booming city, Caesarea. I thought you'd like to see that.
Maritime.
Caesarea. Yes. Maritima, which it really means maritime, I think. Now, there was a Roman fort there, if you will, but it was built after the 1st century. This was probably built in the 4th century or the 5th century. But anyway, those are the walls, and that was a moat. And whether there was water in the moat or not, I'm not sure, but they had a moat just in case because they wanted to be able to defend their fort. And there's another picture of some of the walls and the fort. And so I wanted you to just get a picture of where we had been, although I didn't get the slide that showed Caesarea Philippi. It's right in here. There's Megiddo that we saw last week. And you remember we moved across and saw where Saul died. And then we got back to Jerusalem. And Donna and I wanted to go on the Turkey-Greece tour, which was going to happen in 8 days. We didn't want to come all the way back to the United States. So we stayed 4 extra days in Jerusalem. And 4 days, we went early to Turkey. In any event, on the second day, after everybody else had got on the planes and headed back to the United States, Everett and his wife said, "We're going to go up to Shechem. Do you want to go with us?" I'm sorry, Shiloh. I'll get it right yet. Let me point to Shiloh in case you missed it. There's Shiloh right there. It's about 35 miles north of Jerusalem, which is right down here. And it's in Samaria. It's in the hills of Samaria. I had read about it. It's mentioned in the Bible, but I didn't really understand its significance. So this is the last place we're going to look at, and I want to tell you a few startling things that I think exist about Shiloh. First of all, we only had an hour to be there. They were on a time schedule, and a taxi was waiting for us, and he said, "You got an hour." And he saw what he wanted to see, and we didn't get to see everything we were going to see, and it was time to go. We walked up to this round place here, which is a viewpoint, saw a slideshow there, and we saw some other things too. But let me get to the important part. The Ark of the Covenant was at Shiloh, and if you look on your handout, it says that it was there probably 369 years. I don't think I ever really conceived that it was that long before it ever went to Jerusalem. David brought it to Jerusalem. But for 369 years, the Ark of the Tabernacle was various places. Well, it was here that period, and it was some other places too. At one point, you remember the story, the battle in which the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant, but they kept it for a while, and they had so many problems that they brought it back. But when Eli, the high priest, was sitting on the bench at the gate, and he heard that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken, he fell over backwards and died off the bench. In any event, his sons were not the most upstanding people in the world, but who worked with Eli? Samuel. And you remember the story of Hannah going to pray? I always thought Hannah went to the temple to pray. She didn't. She went to the Ark of the Covenant. Now, there is something that most scholars believe, that the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant within it, the tabernacle did not stay a tent all those 369 years. They made a foundation and they put walls up instead of just the tent walls. And so that's one of the startling things we're going to see in a minute. But in any event, that's where Samuel worked for Eli. And you remember when people called him, he would go greet people at the front door. And God called him, and he said, he thought it was Eli calling him. "Here am I, Lord." But Samuel was a prophet for a long time over all of Israel. Well, there's an olive press, or what's left of one. And that shows kind of how that olive press is working. Okay. You would think that the Ark of the Covenant would be on the top of the hill. That round building I told you about was the top of the hill in Old Shiloh. They think that the Ark of the Covenant was just down over the crest of that hill in this flat area. And one reason that we came here is because the word was that within the last few days, when we were there, they had discovered foundation that they believed was for the Ark of the Covenant or the tabernacle. The foundation, it was exactly the same size. I'll show you another picture about that, but they're excavating that now. And so Everett was very excited to get to run down there with the other archaeologists and look at that. And we didn't get to go down there, but we just kind of looked down at what they were doing in the foundation area. So that's where they were working, in that flat area. And there's a picture that we saw inside, and it's really hard to see. I blew it up and it's still hard to see. But supposedly there's a mountain on the left, and over on the right are some walls, and that's where that circular building would have been. The walls aren't there anymore. But the tabernacle is there sitting in the middle. It's oriented so the opening is to the east. That's the way it was always set up. And I found this picture on the internet. They now believe that this is the location. And it's exactly 150 by 75. And that would have been the size for not just the Ark of the Covenant, but the whole tabernacle. And the little box on the left, there would have been the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant sat in the holy place. So I think that's pretty amazing, and I was glad we got to go there. So Donna and I were the only two out of the 52 people that got to see Shiloh, and I was glad that we stayed an extra day or two and got to see that. So we went through that really fast, I know. You probably saw more pictures of the Sea of Galilee than you wanted to see, or maybe not as many, I don't know. But are there questions? We got just a couple of minutes. Yes.
When they had you set at the city gates, I guess we thought that was because that's where legal matters were resolved.
Well, there were some legal matters.
I was thinking about Route 4 when it says that Boaz went to the city gates, where
yeah,
kind of deal with the legal aspect of it.
Well, and they asked me to sit there. I guess from the standpoint they knew I had formerly been a judge, but the elders sat there too. And we had, in that group of 52 people, I think we had 6 or 7 elders from various congregations. So we should have all sat there, I suppose. Other questions or comments? Next week, we're going to move out of Israel and we're going to Jordan. And we're going to see that there are some things in Jordan that are mentioned in the Bible too. And ultimately, we're going to end up down in Petra, which you don't see mentioned in the Bible. But there's something right next to Petra that's really interesting. I'll save that and you can read about it, or you can pick up an outline and maybe you can figure it out, what's down there by Petra. But in any event, we're going to travel down the east side of the Jordan River. And it's mostly desert. And Donna took lots of pictures out the window, but I'm not going to show all of those. We're going to show a few. In any event, hope you'll be here for that. Take your time to look at any of these brochures or this map of Galilee or the map of Israel. And if you want, pick up lesson 5 for next week. Let's close with a prayer. Would you bow with me?